Today I wanted to go over a load of Alto Taishokoto. There's a mixed bag of sounds and types of altos, so this offers a look at some of the popular series as well as some outliers so that you can get an idea of what to keep an eye out for. I'll start with a spoiler. It's all good, all very different, and there is no correct answer with altos. To start, we have the Nardan Harp Meter Koto. This is an acoustic model released in 1975 by Nardan. Nardan at the time was assisting companies in Korea with technical guidance on guitar manufacturing. In exchange for that help, these Korean companies had special knowledge on working with mother of pearl, or as the Nardan site calls it, shell technology, which is an amazing name. Thus, Nardan released this model with a special mother of pearl inlay depicting a Goshogurama, aka an imperial carriage. Finding the notes on this one was really weird. The info used to be on the Nardan main site under the company history page. At some point, though, they removed the info for no apparent reason. You have to go digging through the Wayback Machine to find it, which is perplexing. The reason this one made it into this episode is a subverting of expectations. This is a long Taishokoto, but not quite as deep of a sound. It sounds more like what some companies call a Type 2. In addition, you've heard me talk about some of these old Taishokotos not being in tune, being hard to play, not being worth it. I wanted to give a prime example of how sometimes it is. I love this one and will never get rid of it. In fact, you've seen this one in a song that I did for the first Taishokoto documentary way back when. The video doesn't do justice to the rich sound and perfect twang of the instrument, not to mention really nice vibrato you can get, which seems amplified really well. This is my little PSA that sometimes you just have to like what you like and screw what is considered technically good. Next up we have the Suzuki Sakyuu Alto. I went over the soprano version of this in episode 8 on Suzuki instruments. The alto version is 94 centimeters long as opposed to the 69.5 centimeter long soprano version. Acoustically, it has a very beefy bass sound, but being blunt has way too much twang and sounds terrible. Again, just acoustically. This is definitely meant more as an all-electric model. The pickup was very interesting though. Sometimes the pickups on a Taishokoto will definitely require amplification, and I try to use a very clean amp to give the best idea of the instrument sound versus my setup. For this one though, it had enough gain on its own that I didn't quote-unquote need gain. I let it speak for itself, which at max volume has a high-pitched buzzing that you can hear disappear when I use the tone knob roll-off. In reality, I would use this with some external gain and turn down the volume knob on the instrument. This is where my propensity towards being a history documentation nerd will always shine over attempting to be a reviewer. Next up we have the Comnics CK220 Electric Alto. This is a dual pickup design that originally sold for 68,000 yen as part of the full line of dual pickup Comnics electrics. I've discussed and shown demos of this line before, but not of the Alto. It's 27 keys, 4 strings, and takes a 9-volt battery. You'll also note in the pictures that the keys have a little bolted together second piece of metal. This was an interesting design Comnics tried out to limit flexion of the keys from side to side. It allows a little wiggle room for pitch expression but prevents overextension which could damage the key. It doesn't affect pressing the button down at all, and from my experience the added weight doesn't seem to affect key return when you let it go. I thought this was pretty clever, and based on what I've seen with older instruments it seems like a pretty good idea. I assume they only dropped the idea from a cost and aesthetics perspective. When I go over this one, I also added in some variations on the pickup selection since the dual pickups offer some differing sounds. Then we have the Suzuki Ran Alto, which comes from the Suzuki Ran series. The Ran series had a soprano, Type 2, alto, and bass. This is probably the most well-known Taishokoto series and tends to be a lot of people's first entrance to the instrument. This is partially because there are so many of them floating around telling us they sold extremely well back in the day, but also because it really is a fantastic instrument. There are two standout pieces to this series. One is the enlarged buttons towards the lower notes, aka the left of the instrument. These make it easier to find and hit the further buttons when you're outstretching your fingers while playing fast. The other is the curved back, which can be seen in the pictures. Let's diverge to other Taishokoto for a second. On others, there's a top plate connecting to the body by 2 or 3 metal angle brackets. Then, on a lot, you'll have a support plate running the length of the top board. Sometimes this can add stability when you press on a key, but for the most part, it's for decoration and keeping the back of the device clean. Sometimes this piece is stapled on, wedged in, or glued. The only time I've seen effect on tonality when pressing keys is when it's a thick backplate which is glued to top and bottom, aka something like the Suzuki Benkei. On the Benkei, you see a very thick backplate versus on the picture of the Kawaii, you see a thin plate not even attached to the bottom body. Not saying the backplate is needed, but it can definitely help. So then back to the Ran. We get this curved top which acts as a backplate as well. This makes for an extremely solid connection which doesn't flex at all and has a super stable tone. This was so successful that you can see on the follow-up of the Kohaku, which is still sold today, there's also a curved top acting as a backplate. For what it's worth, I think that these two pieces really stand out for the alto and the bass, but for the soprano and the Type 2, I think that they're a little bit less of a concern. For what it's worth, the Ran series is good all the way across the spectrum, though I've found some other ones in the soprano and Type 2 that I generally like a little more. For the alto and bass range, however, these are definitely standouts. Next up, we have the Kindenryu Yamazakura. I've gone over this instrument many times before, so I'll keep the comments brief. Definitely check the other video I linked below for more information on it. This one is definitely an alto as listed on the Kindenryu site, but the sound is a bit more muted and higher pitched. This is a little bit of a rehash of the musical range classification episode, but Kindenryu sells soprano, alto, tenor, and bass, rather than the Suzuki labeling of soprano, Type 2, alto, and bass. That means that alto is something a little different depending on the brand. This alto is more like a Type 2 for the Suzuki, and the alto for Suzuki is more like a tenor for Kindenryu. Definitely check out episode 9 on range classification for more info. This general contrast is the reason I put it in this episode. Next up is the Suzuki Ayu. I've also gone over this one before, so I'll keep the comments brief again. The interesting thing about this one is that I think a lot of people get it assuming it sounds like a beefy alto since it's thick. It has a large resonator for volume, but it's definitely more of a soprano or Type 2. I felt like featuring it here for comparison. For more information on this one, I linked the documentary series I did which goes over the Ayu in much more detail. And with that, let's get into some demos.